Hi, I'm Brenna and I'm with the Menomonie Police Department.
Hi, I'm Angie. I'm the Director of Sexual Assault Victim Services at the Bridge to Hope here in Menomonie.
I'm Kat. I am the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate and Campus Advocate also at the Bridge to Hope.
And I'm Kelly. I'm a Patrol Lieutenant with the Menomonie Police Department.
And this is Bridging the Gap. So thank you for joining us for our third video in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which actually was April. Sexual assault is a very prevalent and important topic to be aware of. And so we felt it was important to continue the discussion with this video that'll have some more information and some resources available.
So we thought it was important to first start off by talking about what you should do if you've been a victim of sexual assault. So after a sexual assault, it's really hard to know how to react. You might be physically hurt, emotionally drained, or unsure of what to do next. You may be considering working with the criminal justice system, but are unaware of where to start. So the first thing you want to make sure is that you are physically and emotionally safe. Can you call a friend, a family member, someone you can trust and confide in? Do you need to physically go to another space like the hospital, the police department, something like that? And can you call an advocate? Advocates at the Bridge to Hope are available 24 hours a day, and they can help walk you through your options.
One of those options might be getting checked out medically. Many survivors might be scared to pursue medical attention, and in the immediate wake of a sexual assault, that's really intimidating and often really scary. And it's ultimately up to you to decide what to do in accordance with your own physical, physiological, psychological, and emotional needs. Choosing to go to the hospital after an assault can be beneficial for a number of reasons. Most critically, healthcare practitioners can treat bodily injury and help you ensure that your sexual and physical health is intact, and they can provide STI testing and antibiotics, as well as emergency contraception. Additionally, they can provide you with a SAINN, which is a sexual assault nurse exam, and that's used to collect DNA, collecting blood samples, and other evidence. So if you're not ready to file a police report immediately, the kits can be saved for up to 9.5 years, which is a pretty long time. Try not to shower, brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, or change your clothes. It's okay to do these things. They can still do the exam, but they recommend trying not to do them if possible. And this can be a really great option for people who, again, are unsure if they want to report to law enforcement or not. If somebody decides down the road that they want to, that data is all in storage.
And just to come with another point on that is that we as law enforcement are not going to be contacted if you choose to just go to the hospital and you don't want it reported. The hospital staff will take care of the collection of any evidence, and they will also take care of the storage and proper location of that until you make a decision or choose not to make a decision at all on it. After that, if you decide to contact law enforcement, we will respond. And that's kind of the next stage that you'd have to be at is, do you want to contact law enforcement? We realize most sexual assaults occur between two people who know each other. That doesn't make the assault any less traumatic, but it can make things a little bit more confusing. It can create a sort of embarrassment, hurt, broken trust, and guilt. It leads to a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of underreporting, as people also feel like, because they know the person, that maybe there was something that happened that led to this and they don't report it to us. Regardless of who commits the sexual assault, it's a crime, and it leaves the survivor injured and traumatized. Survivors of sexual assault, especially when committed by an acquaintance, they feel a sense of responsibility for the attack, and they don't report the crime to the police because of that. What you can expect is, if you report the crime to a law enforcement officer, we will respond to you and talk to you where you're comfortable, whether that be at the hospital or at your residence or somewhere else at the police department. We will offer you to have anyone you wish there to be as a support service for you. That includes a parent, a friend, somebody you care about, and we will offer you, if you have not already reached out for their services, we will offer you an advocate from the Bridge to Hope and encourage you to take their services, because they will offer you a great deal of support and guidance as the process goes on. At that point, we are going to have to interview you and talk to you about what happened. We're going to ask you some very uncomfortable questions, very detailed questions. And it's not to upset you or hurt you or embarrass you, but we need to know what happened so we can provide you the best services possible. If you choose to report to the police department, we're going to have to interview you and talk to you about what happened. We aren't trying to re-traumatize you or embarrass you or upset you, but we will be having to ask some very detailed and in-depth questions about what happened to you. At the same time, this conversation and what you share with us is going to be up to you. But the more details we have, the easier it will be for us to determine what happened to you and how to hold the suspect and perpetrator accountable for their actions. We try our best to make sure that we don't keep asking you to retell your story over and over and over again. However, an initial responding officer might ask you limited detailed questions, and an investigator who has more experiences with investigations might follow up later on and ask you those detailed questions at another time.
In the last video, we discussed some significant historical events that have occurred surrounding sexual assault and sexual harassment. And it's important to note that we've come a long way from the age of consent being 10 in Wisconsin, but there's still a long way to go. A prime example that came up recently with this was a trial in Minnesota that made some headlines because it was found that according to their state statute that a victim, if they were intoxicated of their own accord, if they were not forcibly intoxicated, the way the statute read, could not have been raped. And so the judge had to uphold that law. And of course, we know through the conversations that we've had in these videos that, intoxication doesn't factor into consent. It does not mean that you consent to be assaulted if you have some drinks. But a really good way to work towards that is to just educate yourself about the laws in your state if you are in a different state, and contact your representatives about those laws. Change doesn't happen without some movement, and that case in Minnesota really shed some light and started some conversations about that as an example. And that's also a really good example of why some victims may choose not to report. Of the victims that have experienced sexual assault, those that choose to report and actually have a case go to trial, that gets more difficult as time goes on for them. And so then to have something like that happen can be really, really difficult. And so there are some more pros and cons to reporting that we'll touch on here in a moment, but we thought it was important to just shed some light on that.
Some of the pros to reporting is that you have the opportunity to present your side of the incident and tell what happened. The perpetrator may be held accountable for what they did, and you have the opportunity for a sense of closure, some justice. The crime victim compensation can pay for the exam and other medical costs if you report within 5 days. Your report will be held on record and could be possibly used to aid future victims. Reporting prevents the statute of limitations from expiring. Another pro is sometimes we have some of those sexual assault kits that have been tested and we have unknown offenders. If you have a known offender, your offender could be linked to other crimes that no one knew about yet, and bring some justice to someone else. And it also can prevent this from happening possibly to somebody else if this person is somebody who has done this multiple times. So the cons are there's no guarantee that the perpetrator will be charged or convicted. The process may not provide a sense of closure for you. Sometimes, even if it is prosecuted, the sentencing may feel unfair or unsatisfactory. The conviction may not prevent the perpetrator from reoffending. Your privacy may not be protected. Family and friends and peers may find out what happened, and that's not something maybe you want them to know. You may not be believed. You may be shamed by people who are not understanding of how these things happen. and you may be triggered or be forced to relive the events of the assault. While these are some of the cons, if you do choose to report, know that you will have the police department and the Bridge to Hope advocates and many other members of the community that will be there to support you and help you through this process, no matter how tough it is.
We also want to acknowledge that reporting can be really scary for survivors for many, many reasons. One of the reasons that it can be so scary is because the victim survivor might know the person who assaulted them and is afraid of retaliation, or sometimes scared that the perpetrator might get into trouble. This is especially difficult if the perpetrator is an intimate partner. Their partner might be their only source of childcare, their only source of income, their transportation. And so once that perpetrator is arrested, they don't have that support any longer. It's also really scary if the victim is underage. They might be scared that they'll get into trouble if there were drugs or alcohol involved, or they might be scared of their parents finding out. I find this is especially true with high school and college students. They're really afraid that somebody's going to find out. And one way that we can kind of get around that sometimes is that when someone's sexually assaulted and they go get a SAINN exam, the insurance is not billed for that exam. So what pays for it is something called the SAFE Fund, and that's through the state of Wisconsin. And so they don't have to report to law enforcement to do that. They don't have to have any sort of insurance. The nurse just fills it out and sends it in. And so that's sometimes a relief for teenagers or young adults who don't want their insurance to be billed for that reason. And also, folks just don't want anyone to know. Like, as soon as you're assaulted and the police are notified, or maybe your school's notified or whatever, it's really easy to tell who that perpetrator and who that victim is at times. And with online activities such as social media, people tend to find out really quickly, and that's really difficult for folks.
So victim blaming and shaming is unfortunately a huge problem that we see pretty often. And again, kind of like what Angie said, it makes it really hard for people to go on with their normal daily life. It's a huge reason why students might not go back to school or return to campus. And it just happens to kind of continue the stigma. And it's the reason we continue having these discussions is until we change the way that we perceive sexual assault and understand sexual assault, it's going to continue. There's so much stigma if the victim doesn't identify as female. Obviously, or I would hope it's obvious that this isn't a gendered issue, but much of the discussion around sexual assault focuses on women and girls. Sexual violence against males is really underreported, and far more so than the cases for women, largely because of the reluctance of men to report acts of sexual violence to the police. This in turn is likely to be due to the extreme embarrassment that is experienced by a lot of males who are victims of sexual violence. Men are oftentimes more concerned about their own perceptions and the outside perceptions of their masculinity, their sexuality, and opinions of other people. So, they might be afraid that others will think that they are homosexual, think of them as less than a man, or unfortunately, sometimes even act like it's a congratulatory thing, like, good job that this happened, if the perpetrator was maybe a woman. Or they might be shamed for the fact that they were unable to prevent the rape. Fear of police is another reason that people sometimes are reluctant to report or have problems coming forward. They might have negative personal, family, or community experiences with law enforcement. And this often causes Black survivors to feel that reporting their sexual violence to the police is not an option for them. Other reasons that Black survivors say they chose not to report often include fear of physical violence against them or against their family, worries about being unjustly accused of being the perpetrator of a crime, and feelings that even if a report is made, they still might not get the justice that they need, and that they're sometimes met with a lack of culturally competent resources.
We also want to acknowledge that there are additional challenges for those who may have a disability. Sometimes it could be because people with disabilities are stereotyped as a survivor that may face challenges having their story taken seriously. And in some instances, individuals who have a disability may rely on the perpetrator for care or support. For the disabled community, caretakers, therapists, doctors, and others are in positions of power. And this can create a dangerous power dynamic that adds another barrier to reporting. And then depending on the severity and type of the disability, survivors may not have the support and adequate resources, such as an interpreter or proper equipment to report their assault. So what should you do if a friend or loved one discloses sexual assault to you? It's not always easy to know what to say when someone tells you that they've been sexually assaulted, especially if they are a friend or a family member. For a survivor, disclosing to someone they care about can be really difficult. So we encourage you to be as supportive and non-judgmental as possible.
The way that we respond to somebody who's disclosing really has a huge impact on their healing and their journey moving forward. So here are a few things that we can say as, a jumping off point when we maybe know somebody who's been through this and is disclosing to us. Number one, I think it's important to tell them, I believe you, and to let them know, I know it took a lot of courage to come forward and to tell me about this. It can be really hard for survivors to come forward and to share their story, and they might feel ashamed or concerned that they won't be believed. That's a huge worry for people who have been through this, or even worried that they might be blamed. I think it's important to leave those why questions to investigators or other experts. Your job as a friend, a family member, somebody close to the victim is to just be a support. Try not to interpret to their calmness. Some people might not have these extreme reactions that we expect from survivors. So try not to interpret their calmness as a sign that the event did not occur. Everyone responds really differently to traumatic events. And the best thing that you can do is believe them and work with them at their own pace. Similarly, try and remind them that it's not their fault and that they didn't do anything that would make them deserving of what happened. Survivors might believe that they themselves are a part of what caused the assault to occur, or that if they had done something differently, it wouldn't have happened, especially if they know the perpetrator personally, which often is the case. So reminding them probably even more than once that they're not to blame is really important and helps reaffirm them and validate them that they are not in the wrong and they did nothing to cause their hurt. Letting them know that they're not alone, that you care about them and that you're here to listen and help in any way you can be really helpful too. Let the survivor know that there are a lot of things that you're willing to do to help them out, whether that be listen to their story, if they're comfortable sharing it, maybe help assess if people are in their life that they're comfortable going to, find what resources are available for them that they're comfortable accessing, whether that be talking with an advocate, talking with law enforcement, seeing a counselor or a therapist. So yeah, just keep reminding them that there are service providers and other people in their life who would be able to support them and help them heal. And then finally, another really important thing is to tell them, I'm sorry that this happened, or this shouldn't have happened to you. It's important to acknowledge that the experience has affected them, no matter what that looks like, because again, it's going to be on such a case-by-case basis. No two survivors are going to have the same experience or the same reactions. So phrases like, this must be really tough for you, and I'm so glad that you're sharing this with me, can be really helpful in communicating empathy for the victim and helping them feel seen and heard after their experience.
And then we want to make sure that we keep offering the support. That continued support is going to help that survivor heal throughout this process. So there are many ways that you can do that. One of those is to avoid judgment. It can be really difficult to watch a survivor struggle with the effects of a sexual assault for an extended period of time, but we want to try to avoid phrases that suggest that they're taking too long to recover, such as, you've been acting like this for a while now, or how much longer will you feel this way? It's not that big of a deal, just get over it. We all heal at different paces, and there's nothing wrong with it taking a long time or maybe a little time. Like it's just different for everybody. We also want to make sure that we're checking in periodically. This event might have happened a long time ago, but that doesn't mean that the pain is now gone. So we want to check in with the survivor to remind them that you still care about them and that you believe their story. Then you want to make sure that you know your resources. Even though you're a strong supporter, that doesn't mean that you're equipped to manage someone else's health. Become familiar with resources that you can recommend to somebody, such as the National Sexual Assault Hotline at RAINN.org. You can also find local resources to find a sexual assault crisis center that's near you. In Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault, which is WCASA. If you go to their website, they have a map of the whole state of Wisconsin, and it has the SASPs, which are sexual assault providers, for each county that are listed on there. So you can just click on what county you're in and find a resource that's near you. And you can also contact an advocate at the Bridge to Hope if you're unsure. If you're from a different county, we can hook you up with resources that are closer to you, or we can still connect with you and talk you through it. So it's always helpful to contact your local sexual assault service provider for advice on medical care and laws surrounding the sexual assault. If the survivor needs medical attention or plans to report, we can always offer to be with them. And you can offer to be there as a friend or a loved one. Your presence can always offer the support that they need. And you want to also make sure that if the person is considering suicide, that you can learn the warning signs and offer to help and support. We don't want to minimize what's happening or to talk around it. It's really important that we address that head on. And if you're unsure what to say, you can always contact someone at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can call a local resource that you have in your community. You can call someone at the Bridge to talk through it, but we don't want to ignore those instances. And then you always want to encourage them to practice good self-care during this time. And not only encourage the survivor to take care of themselves, but you need to take care of yourself as well. For as much as you want to be a good support for that person, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to help them either.
So what can you do as a citizen to help prevent or combat sexual violence in our community? There's several bystander intervention techniques that you can partake in. An engaged bystander is someone who lives up to that responsibility by intervening before, during, or after a situation when they see or hear behaviors that threaten, harass, or otherwise encourage sexual violence. The behaviors that make up sexual violence exist on a spectrum. While some behaviors, such as sexist jokes, inappropriate sexual comments, innuendos, catcalling, or vulgar gestures, aren't illegal, this does not make them any less threatening or harmful to the person experiencing them. These situations also take place across a range of locations and settings, often in public spaces, workplaces, schools, communities, and online. All of us must embrace our voices to demonstrate that these behaviors will not be tolerated. How can you be a good bystander? Disrupt the situation. Every situation is different, and there is no one way to respond. When you witness a person being harassed, threatened, or followed by someone, you can try to distract the harasser or insert yourself into their interaction to help the targeted person get out of the situation. For example, if you see someone on the street being verbally harassed, you can interrupt the harasser and ask them for directions. You can also intervene by pretending to know the person being harassed and starting a conversation with them as an opportunity to come between them and the harasser. Don't act alone. Get support from people around you by calling on others to help. The more people who come together to interrupt a situation, the more you will reinforce the idea that a behavior is not acceptable in your community. This can be as simple as saying, let's say something to them so they stop. If you do not feel safe, you may consider contacting the police. Confront the harasser, but only do this if you can do it in a safe manner. Whether or not you know the harasser, you can intervene by telling them in a respectful, direct, and honest way that their words or actions are not okay. For example, when you hear someone make comments that blame victims for being assaulted or make light of sexual violence, you can tell them, you need to stop. That's so inappropriate. What you just said made me feel uncomfortable, and here's why. Do you realize how problematic this is? We need to talk about what you just said, and why would you say that?
Set the expectation to speak up and step in. By talking openly and responding directly to inappropriate behaviors and comments, that'll have a snowball effect and hopefully encourage others to respond as well. It shows that you recognize that the comment or behavior is unacceptable, and it shows that others won't tolerate it either. For example, if you're in a group setting and you hear somebody make inappropriate comments, you can say, are you hearing what I'm hearing? I can't be the only person that doesn't think that this is okay. I don't see how X, Y, and Z is relevant or appropriate to the discussion, and I know you're a better person than that. Understand how your privileged position allows you to speak up. Your age, race, gender, etc. might make it safer for you to speak up and be vocal about harassment, especially when you aren't the target or the representative of the targeted group. So by focusing on the needs and experience of the target and ensuring that they receive the support that they need, that lets them know that what happened to them isn't their fault. It affirms to them that they didn't do anything wrong and expresses your support for them as an individual. So you can say something like, I saw what they just did. Are you okay? Or I heard what that person said to you and I'm so sorry. You can take action online. Everybody can help address an online culture that tolerates rape and sexual violence. Online comments that blame victims contribute to a broader climate in which sexual violence is tolerated and not taken seriously. Believe and support survivors, for example. Just thank survivors and for sharing their stories in the comments on news articles, blog posts, wherever you might see them. You can respond to victim blaming, rape jokes, or other problematic comments on social media. You can respond with something like, sexual assault is never the survivor's fault. You can refocus accountability on the individual or individuals who committed the sexual abuse. You can link to an educational resource about sexual violence prevention, like those links that can be found in the description of this video. You can also be proactive. You can practice with your friends and family about what you would say and how you would say if you're ever put in a situation where you might need to encounter or confront somebody who's harassing somebody else. You can think of how you would like others to take action on your behalf in those situations, or reflect on situations where you wish you had acted differently. And beyond the bystander intervention techniques, again, I want to reiterate that when it comes to the legal side of things, you can contact your representatives about current laws and advocate for victims of sexual assaults and abuse. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I also want to add as a caveat that for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, the Bridge to Hope had recommended reading a book called Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And I think that is just a phenomenal resource for understanding the victim's perspective on not just the initial incident of what it was like to be in that position, but also the process that they go through when it comes to dealing with trauma or navigating the court system and the effect it has on their families and loved ones too.
I'm glad you brought that up, Brenna. I do want to say that if you do choose to read the book, just remember it is about sexual assault, and so make sure you're safe when you're reading it, and if you need to step away, take breaks. Just make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Thank you for watching. We'll post resources in the description and at the end of this video, and stay tuned for future videos, which I believe our next ones are going to focus on mental health.